And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with me. I'm Casey Hendrickson in the Silver Fox Art Studios. Of course, check them out online, silverfoxart.com. Custom, unique wall art, logos, family pictures, pictures of your pet, three-dimensional, made out of wood with backlighting. Fantastic company to work with, silverfoxart.com. All right, so we got to talk about a couple of things here. We're going to get into the tragic killing of this American journalist who is overseas in the Ukraine. A lot of interesting things coming out about it that I've noticed are very similar to the story which involved the Sky News team. But there may be evidence pointing towards the Ukrainians, not the Russians, actually killing this guy. Though we don't know for sure, but we'll actually look at it. So at least you have some perspective and can kind of take a look at something maybe a little bit different than what you're getting in the mainstream here. It is war after all. Things do happen. So I wanted to start off with Kamala Harris making a fool of herself, and this is her meeting. This is her, her Polish counterpart is sitting there talking, and this happens. Let me cue up my audio here so you guys can hear this. This is a national embarrassment.
And for President Duda, I wanted to know if you think, and if you asked the United States to specifically accept more refugees.
Okay. A friend in need is a friend indeed.
Okay, I can first. Okay, so this time, Szanowna Pani redaktor.
Okay. Maybe there's some inside something happening that we're not aware of that was so funny to them, but to the international community, all they heard was a reporter ask about the refugee crisis in Ukraine and whether or not Poland, and that's, of course, President Duda from Poland, whether or not he had asked the United States to take more refugees. And then, as Kamala does, she just laughs awkwardly. She always laughs awkwardly with a tough question. So, like I said, we don't know what happened in their private meeting. We do know that President Duda basically admonished the United States, specifically Secretary Blinken, kind of mocked him with the public press conference, and Kamala Harris laughing when we're talking about refugees and the Ukrainians who have been uprooted because of this conflict is not a good look for the United States at all. But Kamala Harris couldn't keep it under wraps, so she always laughs when there's a tough question there. So much so that Zelensky's former press secretary slammed Kamala Harris after she laughed during her meeting with the Polish president. And so Benjamin Hall, he's got this, and he screen capped it because Mrs. Mendel deleted it. But this is what she actually had to post. It would be a tragedy if this woman won the presidency. Yep. Pretty much. That's basically what everybody feels. Nobody wants her. Nobody likes her except for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is trying to push Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg on everybody. Nobody likes Kamala Harris. Nobody likes Pete Buttigieg. Okay. I should say nobody who isn't white likes Pete Buttigieg. I'll put it that way. Pete Buttigieg has his supporters in liberal, wealthy, white circles, but he doesn't have any supporters anywhere else. And Kamala Harris is not popular with anybody. Everybody pretty much detests the woman for various reasons. So, yes, I agree with Mrs. Mendel. She gave a really good interview here, by the way, on Fox News. I encourage you to watch it, but it's not really relevant to the story. I just wanted to pull that story up because they quoted her in there. But she did. She pulled this down. She 100%, she pulled this down. She didn't want anybody to see it, but everything gets posted on the internet and everything gets saved forever. So always remember that. No matter what you post, it will be there forever. All somebody has to do is actually look for it. That's it. It's there. Okay. Everything you posted when you were a kid, still there. So I wanted to get into this because this is a tough story, and I'm going to let you know right now. I'm going to play some footage. I'm not going to play anything that's overly graphic. Okay. I want you to know that. I'm not going to do that to you, but I'm going to play some footage that might be uncomfortable for some people who are very uncomfortable with warfare. Okay. And this is important, I think, that people see this. I'm going to flash back here before we get into the American journalist who was just killed in Ukraine. This is, and I was going to play this for you last week anyway, so I'm actually kind of glad that I didn't, because this gives us perfect opportunity to use this as a compare and contrast to what happened to the American journalist who was killed this last week. So this is a Sky News team. Now, this is a Sky News team. They're near Kiev, okay, near the capital of Ukraine. And they were driving in a car. They got ambushed. And so if you've never seen people take fire up close and personal, you're about to. So again, I've given you the warnings here. There's nothing overly graphic, but it's intense. And if you haven't experienced this before, this is likely going to be something that kind of messes with you a little bit. But most people will be okay. It's nothing horrendously awful or anything like that, but it's certainly intense. And everybody got away, okay? So, yes, their camera operator did take 2 rounds to his body armor, but he's okay, all right? So just I'm letting you know that right off the get-go, just in case you haven't seen this before. But they talk about how Ukraine has said that there's basically these ambush teams of Russians that are, basically killing civilians and attacking civilians and things like that. Here's the other thing that we know, though. And, again, I'm just trying to give you perspective because every time I mention anything that might provide an alternative explanation from the Ukrainian one, I'm always accused of being pro-Russia. Obviously, I'm not. I've made this very, very clear over the past several weeks throughout this conflict. But I stand by something that I say on my show on a regular basis. The side that supports censorship is never in the right. And when I'm watching the amount of censorship that is happening here, you have to start asking yourself why that censorship is happening. When, our side, if you will, the Western media will go out there and tell you that, well, we're censoring Russian propaganda because we don't want Russia's propaganda to, infect people's minds and that sort of thing. But we do know that the Ukrainians have used a lot of propaganda. They used fake dead bodies. They've used pictures of Libya and Lebanon. Maybe not Libya, Lebanon, definitely. They've used pictures and video of Lebanon to pretend that it was actually Ukrainian cities and rubble from different conflicts. They've had, crisis actors stage themselves as if they were dead when they're not. You can clearly see that they have been untouched. There's no damage. They all fell in exactly, a perfect way, side, cradle position. People don't die like that. And certainly not like 4 people in a row. They don't die like that. So there's been a lot of propaganda that's come out of Ukraine that has been allowed to run rampant in American media and on social media. And some of those early propaganda campaigns from Ukraine were exposed actually by Russian media, specifically the Snake Island 13. Snake Island 13 were not killed. They were captured. And it was Ukrainian propaganda that they were killed mercilessly and that sort of thing, standing in the face of danger and telling a superior foe to basically go bleep themselves. But it wasn't real. It didn't happen. So what's interesting about this is the same people who are saying that we need to censor Russian media because of propaganda are the same people who have been spreading propaganda about COVID and Trump-Russia collusion and quid pro quo with Ukraine and all those lies that were spread by our media. So you're going to be allowed to see propaganda, just the propaganda that our propagandists want you to see. Get it? That's a problem for me. And I've said this on my show many, many times. The side that is pro-censorship is almost always in the wrong. And in this case, both sides are pro-censorship. Russians don't want anything from the West getting through. The West doesn't want anything from Russia getting through, that sort of thing. So you, as the casual observer here, how are you supposed to get reliable information? Well, that's where people like me come through and do our best to at least try and present every side of it so you can at least get a fuller, broader picture of what's going on. Because most of what you're seeing in American media, and it doesn't matter if it's CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever it is not accurate. There's some truth to all of it, but there's a lot of context that's missing. And again, Ukrainian propaganda is allowed to now, but with Russian media being banned, Ukrainian propaganda emanates throughout our society, going completely and totally unchecked. And that's something that they didn't want Russian media to do. They didn't want Russian media to call attention to those fake stories early on because they were, and the Ukrainian propaganda was being exposed. Well, if you keep catching the Ukrainians lying to people, guess what? A lot of people are going to turn on the Ukrainians and go, maybe there's something to this. Maybe Vladimir Putin isn't the crazy person that he's being portrayed here. Why are the Ukrainians constantly lying about all of this stuff? They couldn't have that. So they banned Russian media. You're not allowed to get access to it. There's ways for you to get access to it, obviously, online, but it's still very difficult for you to get access to Russian news on this conflict. And Russia, to the point, also hasn't released a lot, especially the Ministry of Defense. They have not released a lot of information on their end either. And of course, the war is going very badly for the Russians. The Ukrainians are still losing, but it's going very, very badly for the Russians. There are a lot of reports that, frankly, we can't confirm anything, and it's purely speculation. It's purely coming from the Biden administration, that sort of stuff. Biolabs are not bioweapons labs, okay? And that's one of the biggest things that I'm seeing. I don't know if that is just disingenuous or dishonest reporting, and I'm seeing that in the left, the right, doesn't really matter. A biolab is not a bioweapons lab. The U.S. has biolabs set up all over the world. The U.S. uses other countries to set up these biolabs and research facilities because those countries don't have the ethics laws in place that the United States does. That's how Dr. Fauci sets up his little experiments in China, where he basically cuts the vocal cords of puppies and then tortures the puppies to death. He can only do that in places like China. He can't do that in the United States. It's against the law here. So the U.S. does this all over the place. It's not just in Ukraine. It's all over. And Ukraine has been a dumping ground of American political and elite money laundering and corruption and things like that since it broke away from the Soviet Union. So there's a lot going on in Ukraine that the American people don't know about. It's a beautiful country. Kiev is an absolutely stunning capital city, but the Ukrainian people are extremely friendly and peaceful for the most part. There's obviously those issues on the Eastern Front. It's not a neo-Nazi country like Vladimir Putin says, but there are Nazi elements, and it's important that people understand why there are Nazi elements. They basically were given the choice of, do we side with Stalin, who was persecuting us, or do we side with Hitler during World War II, who promised us a free and independent Ukraine? So they went with Hitler. And that has stuck with a lot of people, especially in the eastern part of Ukraine, where the persecution of their people was the most severe. It's not something that is widespread. It is not a nationwide issue, but there are certainly pockets of the Ukrainian population that still identify as neo-Nazi. But the history behind that, which you and I probably can never understand, is they were basically faced with two evils. One was butchering and torturing them, and the other one offered them independence as long as they stuck with him, and he supported their efforts. So they went with Hitler for that, and for a lot of people, multi-generationally, they've continued to carry that line, if you will. Okay, so it's an explanation. It's not an excuse. Just in case you had any ideas about it, we talked about the fake news with the Sparta Battalion last week, and somebody that I know who is well versed in Ukraine as well basically said, "Hey, maybe explain why there's so many Nazis in Ukraine." And so there you go. There's a quick little summary of that. I don't need to go into a whole history of it. But it's important that people understand why they're there. And they do have a connection to some American groups, So Azov has done some training with American groups and things like that. We may talk about that in the future. We'll see. But Vladimir Putin is clearly lying about a lot in Ukraine, but Ukraine is also lying a lot about Russia and Vladimir Putin, especially Donbass. And it's important for you to have a perspective from both sides so you can at least kind of keep up with what's going on. But the moment the Western media found the Russian media to be inconvenient because they were debunking all of these fake Ukrainian stories, we just shut them all down so they can't do it anymore. And now you're getting all sorts of stuff. Oh, Vladimir Putin might use chemical weapons. Based on what? Based on what evidence? Oh, Vladimir Putin is trying to get a false flag with chemical weapons because of the biolabs. There's no evidence of that. None's ever been released. So now we're just saying whatever we want at will. And, it's becoming more and more difficult to verify that stuff. Even stuff that the Western media is saying the Russians have admitted to, when you go to the official Russian accounts on social media, they're not admitting to it. So it becomes very difficult for you to verify all of that. Now, if the Western media had said, hey, the Russians admitted to using a vacuum bomb on this news agency, wouldn't it be nice if you as an American could go to that news agency really easily and verify that they're admitting that? But you can't because they stopped it. So that's where we start running into these issues where they can tell you whatever you want now, and you don't know if they're telling you the truth because you don't have the Russian perspective to rebuff that. And again, the Russians might be totally lying about something. But if you get both sides, you can decipher who is providing the most amount of evidence. And we last week, in Mariupol, the city of Mariupol in Ukraine is become, unfortunately, very, very tragic. Last week, before we started seeing the hospital and everything else, I showed you video of Russian troops in Mariupol refusing to shoot civilians. And what has changed? Now, the Russians, basically, they say that hospital that was bombed was not operational and it was being used by Ukrainian forces and that sort of thing. The problem is that we clearly see pregnant women who are injured coming out of that hospital. But when you go through the rubble of the hospital, you also don't see the typical carnage that you would see from a fully staffed hospital. So, were there some people in that hospital? It appears so. It doesn't appear to be a fully operational hospital. Maybe that's because of migration away from it, because of the conflict. But there's some things that, you have to look at. Now, some people go, well, it's still a hospital. You don't bomb a hospital. The Russians, at first, this is why I think the Russians are lying here. The Russians at first said that the hospital was not operational, was being used by Ukrainian forces, but then they said that they didn't do it and that it was the Ukrainians who bombed the hospital themselves to blame the Russians. So they've got two different stories, which usually means the Russians are lying. Ukrainians are probably telling the truth. But what I see in Ukraine, I see a lot of these same tactics used by the Palestinians. And that should give everybody some pause. And why would the Ukrainians use those tactics? Because they're effective. The international media picks up on those stories. The underdog, the big giant technologically advanced bully, and they're attacking civilians and that sort of thing. And as I've highlighted before, if you are one of these Ukrainians who got a rifle and you've now joined the fight against the Russians, you're not a civilian anymore. And that needs to be factored in. And, of course, Western media is not factoring that in. So just for perspective on both sides here, again, it doesn't make what Vladimir Putin did right. I've told you that he has some legitimate reasons for his military actions, but it doesn't make it justifiable, doesn't make it right, doesn't make Russia the good guys, Ukraine the bad guys. It's clearly not the case. But you still need to have that perspective if you're going to understand this conflict at all. So this is the Sky News team out of the UK, and one of the claims is that these Russian hit squads are hitting civilian vehicles. They're basically operating behind enemy lines and that sort of thing, and that's going to be a very critical component when we talk about this American journalist who was killed last week. So this happened a little while ago. This is not what happened over the weekend. This is a completely different story, okay?
The Ukrainian people are being attacked from the air, from artillery, from ground troops and tanks. The debris of this war litters every street. But the government has warned for days of Russian saboteurs who've infiltrated the country to bring terror. Death squads who are attacking civilians in their cars as they flee. They do exist, as we found out.
Oh, that's the tyre, isn't it?
It's an IED.
That was a bullet.
Sorry?
No, it wasn't a bullet.
It wasn't. Something blew up under us.
Something went bang.
Okay.
Oh, there's a big fuck off hole.
Okay. Oh,
Whoa!
okay. Wait.
Whoa! Whoa! What the f? Whoa! 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 Stop! Where the f is everyone?
Yeah.
Where is everyone?
Here.
Stop!
We think it's a Ukrainian checkpoint and a mistake, so we identify ourselves.
British journalists! Journalists!
Journalists!
Journalista!
Can anyone? You alright, Stu?
Journalista!
And they're not yelling loud enough for anybody to hear them
Is
anyway.
everyone okay? You okay, Dom?
Journalists!
Somehow we have to get out of this, but the rounds keep coming. It's a professional ambush.
Ow.
The bullets just don't miss.
Whoa! Andre! Whoa! Whoa! No! Stop! Stop! Journalist! Journalist! Hey? Where are you
I'm
going?
hit, but escape the car, and with producer Dominic van Heerden, we make our way down the embankment.
Where are
Camera operator Richie Mockler has taken 2 rounds to his body armour, but is still stuck in the car.
Where are they? Where are you guys? Guys! Where are you?
He runs for it in a hail of bullets.
And he goes down the embankment. All right, now at this point, they simply walk away. They get to an industrial area where a machine shop or some kind of a factory is still actually operating, and there's still employees working there, and they take shelter in there. Several hours later, they're actually rescued. Now, the reason that I want to show this story is because, like the story where the American journalist was killed, this happened right outside of Kiev and involves checkpoints. So they said it was Russians. They never did prove that. The Ukrainians said that they were Russians, and that may be true. It's just that they don't really know. It's entirely possible that there were Ukrainians doing this. Keep in mind that there are civilians who are now armed, that the Ukrainians are putting, there's a story about this over the weekend, the Ukrainians are putting teenage boys on the front lines who have 3 days training. And for those of you who are veterans, you know, you take your least experienced people, you put them at a checkpoint. So it's possible that it's Russians, because we've also seen video, probably Spetsnaz, we've also seen video of Russian troops wearing uniforms, disappearing into the woods, changing into civilian clothes, coming back out of the woods. We've seen that as well, which is a standard Spetsnaz tactic. So it is entirely possible that they are Russian. The Ukrainians say that they're Russian, but it's also possible that we don't really know. And that's the important thing to keep in mind. Just because they say it's Russians doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And since both sides basically use the same equipment, it's a little difficult to tell who is actually firing at who. Whereas if you have an AK versus an AR, or not an AR, obviously it's an M16, but you know what I mean, then you'd be able, or an M4, you'd be able to tell the difference in the sounds and that sort of thing. You can't really do that here. So it's becoming a little difficult and very, very muddied. So the Sky News team was told by the Ukrainians that they were attacked by Russians. They believe that. That's their report, okay? It was never actually officially confirmed because they're, again, at a Ukrainian checkpoint, and we maybe it was a Russian death squad, maybe it wasn't, who knows? But they were also in a civilian car. So I got more kind of tied to this tragic death of this American journalist here, and also a little bit later on, DuckDuckGo is done exactly what I told you DuckDuckGo was going to do. They became woke and started doing exactly what every other search engine is doing. So what are your options? We'll talk about that coming up in just a couple of minutes. But first, I got to pay some bills with our wonderful sponsor, SilverFoxArt.com. All right, welcome back. Once again, Casey Hendrickson here from the Silver Fox Art Studios. So Brent Renaud unfortunately lost his life in Ukraine. Now, he wasn't on assignment for the New York Times at the time. It's kind of up in the air on what exactly he was doing in the country, or if he was working for anybody, if he was doing independent stuff. He's also a filmmaker. It's important to note that. So unfortunately, he's passed away. He was killed. He was shot in the neck. Now, this has obviously led to everybody, and we'll get into this, saying, hey, the Russians killed him, and that all comes from a video that was taken of him dead by a Ukrainian soldier and posting it on the internet and saying the Russians did this, okay? So we're relying on the word of the Ukrainians that it was, in fact, the Russians who killed him. But there's some questions about that, kind of like there were some questions with the Sky News thing. And shortly after that Sky News story broke, well, the Ukrainians said, hey, there's these Russian, death squads that are everywhere. We don't know for sure if it were the Russians. Nobody got a chance to see them. Nobody was able to identify them, and nobody really knows. It's certainly possible that it was some, behind enemy lines Russian unit. Maybe it's possible that they're doing that, but it's also possible that Ukrainians did it. You would assume screaming journalists would have, stopped the Ukrainians, but who knows at that point? We know that criminals have been let out to fight the conflict. We know that teenage kids who have only 3 days training are fighting in this conflict on behalf of Ukraine. So we don't know. And all I'm saying is, it may lean one way. You can certainly believe the Ukrainians. They might very well be telling the truth. But if nothing else, don't just automatically believe the headlines that you're getting, considering the Russians don't offer any counter perspective because they're not allowed to at this point in time. So Jane Ferguson just left roadside spot near Irpin, where the body of the American journalist Brent Renaud was laid under a blanket. Ukrainian medics could do nothing for him at that stage. Outraged Ukrainian police officer tell America, tell the world. Sorry, my notification is supposed to turn off when I turn it upside down, but it's not working right now. What they did to a journalist. Okay. Now, this led to people wondering if it was targeted or if it was collateral damage. People are basically saying, oh, it was targeted. Well, by targeted, you've got to be very careful how you choose your words there. He was in a civilian car. He did not appear to identify himself as press at all in any of his clothing. So it's entirely possible that whether it was the Russians or the Ukrainians who engaged him, they didn't know who he was or what he was doing, okay? And we still don't really know what he was doing either, but it's important that people understand that. So by targeted, that has now meant that they specifically targeted an American journalist. They knew who he was and they targeted him. There is zero evidence of that. None whatsoever. Was the vehicle he in intentionally shot at? Yes. Is that your definition of targeted? Okay, it was targeted. Did they target a journalist? Did they know it was a journalist that they were attacking? Zero evidence of that whatsoever. None. Zero, not a zilch. There is no evidence that they targeted him because he was a journalist. But he was in a vehicle that was intentionally shot at. So, yeah, I guess he was targeted. Now, here's where things get pretty interesting. This is a very interesting write-up by Jordan Schachtel. So, on Sunday morning, Brent Renaud, an American filmmaker and journalist who had previously been with the New York Times, was not on assignment with the Times in Ukraine, was tragically killed while reporting on the refugee crisis arising from the Russia-Ukraine war. You know, the thing that Kamala Harris thinks is really funny to laugh about. It was reported in the corporate press in almost unanimous fashion that Russia was responsible for his passing, even though there's no evidence that had emerged to confirm this claim, which was disseminated by Ukrainian officers at the crime scene. So let's just pause for a second, okay? The Ukrainians could totally be telling the truth here. Just like with the Sky News situation, the Ukrainians could be telling the truth. But let me ask you this question. If you were the Ukrainian government and your people fired on journalists by accident or on purpose, but let's just assume it's by accident, and God forbid even killed one of them, would you ever admit to that? Or would you simply tell them that the Russian death squads did it? Exactly. You already know the answer to that. That doesn't mean that they're and I'm not telling you that the Ukrainians are lying. Okay, you shouldn't automatically assume that they're lying. But wouldn't it be nice if the news media, when they reported this story, says the Ukrainians say the Russians did it, but we don't have any actual evidence, or the Russians have have denied it or what have you. Nobody's even talking to the Russians to get their perspective on any of this. But this story gets a little bit more hairy than the Sky News story. We'll get to that in just a little bit. There's some examples. Again, killed by Russian forces in Ukraine, gunned down by Russian troops. There's no evidence of that. We don't know. All we have is the Ukrainians saying so, okay? In a moment's notice, powerful world leaders and individuals routinely condemned Russia for the tragic death of the American citizen. You got Boris Johnson involved here. You got Ned Price. Again, they're tweeting all of this stuff out, okay? Of all of the available evidence we have points to Ukrainians, not the Russians. Now, I disagree with that statement. I wouldn't say all of it, but I would say that the evidence does seem to point to the Ukrainians. But there's a caveat that I'll get to a little bit later. This morning, Renaud and his crew, which had been contracted with Time magazine, were traveling through the outskirts of Kiev, Ukraine's capital city, and on their way to document the plight of the refugee situation. All right, so once again, it's outside Kiev, all right, just like the Sky News team. Now, there are Russian elements near Kyiv. According to Ukrainian soldiers on the scene, Renaud's vehicle came under fire from Russian forces, resulting in his death. After Renaud was killed, Ukrainian police and public affairs officials took photos and videos of Renaud's still warm body, posting the display on the internet for the world to see. I will not show you that video. That video is here, okay? I'm not going to show it to you, though. Since the initial Ukrainian PR campaign, compelling evidence, in addition to multiple eyewitness testimony, has emerged to tell a very different story of the day's events. A Ukrainian soldier says the shooting occurred in the settlement of Romanovka. Okay. Now, again, this is the video where they show his body. I will not show that to you. Okay. The location of the incident is very significant because it established that the shooting took place well within a swath of territory that remains within the lines controlled by Ukrainian forces. All right. So we've got problem with Russia killed him narrative number one, in that this is an area firmly in control by Ukrainian forces. This isn't an outskirt contested region. This isn't no man's land. This is apparently an area of the country that is controlled by Ukraine. And the Russian troops have not pushed in here yet. Now, does that mean that there isn't a Russian unit operating behind enemy lines? Of course not. They absolutely could be. That's what Spetsnaz do. They certainly could be operating behind enemy lines without the Ukrainians knowing who or where they are and still conducting these operations. So I want that to be crystal clear, okay? The Russians could clearly have done this. But there's still some more evidence here that may lean towards the Ukrainians. The Russians have, in recent days, repeatedly shelled the entire area, but Renaud was killed by nearby gunfire, okay? It was an ambush on his vehicle, just like you saw with the Sky News team. And the reason I showed you that vehicle, or that video of that vehicle getting ambushed, is because that's basically what happened to this guy. The New York Times confirmed that the incident occurred at a Ukrainian checkpoint. Okay. Well, Sky News thought they were at a Ukrainian checkpoint too, and they got shot at. Are the Russians operating that close to Ukrainian checkpoints without the Ukrainians knowing about it? And if so, why aren't the Ukrainians doing better with their OPs? That becomes a real concern. The Ukrainians have had much better tactics. They've conducted themselves in, I would say, a more professional fashion than the Russians have, by and large. Why aren't they able to observe enemy movements near their checkpoints? Why don't they know what's going on there? We've got 2 vehicles with journalists in it that were ambushed at Ukrainian checkpoints or near Ukrainian checkpoints, allegedly by Russian troops. And nobody knows where these Russian troops are. That's not a good sign. Captain Bogai, the deputy chief of police in Irpin, said that Mr. Renaud was shot in the head while Russian forces fired at his car, which was being driven by a local civilian across a Ukrainian checkpoint near the northern border of Irpin. So even the police captain says he was at a Ukrainian checkpoint. Okay, civilian car crossing a Ukrainian checkpoint. So once again, we've got civilian cars. I don't know if the last car with Sky News was properly marked as press. I don't know. But it is important to note that, when you talk about targeted killing, was he targeted because he was a journalist? Was he targeted just because he was in that vehicle and he was going the wrong direction when they weren't supposed to? That becomes the question there, okay? Our most important eyewitness is Juan Arredondo, Renaud's colleague, who was physically in the vehicle with him at the time that they came under fire. He was interviewed earlier in the day from a Ukrainian hospital where he discussed what happened at the scene of the chaotic incident. We crossed the checkpoint. They started shooting at us. So the driver turned around and they kept shooting at us. I saw him being shot in the neck. We got split up, and I got pulled into the ambulance. I don't know what happened to him. All right, so here, let me just turn this on. I want you to hear it, his own words, so you're not just assuming that I'm putting words in his mouth.
Tell me, please, what is your name?
Juan.
Juan?
Juan.
Where are you from?
The U.S.
Yes. What happened to you?
We crossed the first bridge in Irpin. We were going to film other refugees leaving, and we got into a car. Somebody offered to take us to the other bridge, and we crossed a checkpoint, and they started shooting at us. So the driver turned around, and they kept shooting. It's two of us. My friend is Brent, Renaud, and he's been shot and left behind.
And how is he?
I don't know.
You don't know. You don't know what happened to him.
I saw him being shot in the neck.
Okay, so once again, you got a civilian who offered to give them a ride in the civilian's car. Okay, so this is not a vehicle that was marked press or anything like that. And they were shot. And he says he saw Brent get shot in the neck. So again, very tragic situation. And I'm obviously not trying to make light of it or anything else. I just want people to kind of understand what's happening here. And since nobody else seems to be giving you alternative perspectives, I guess that's my job. So everybody else is kind of rah, Russia bad, Ukraine good, and not really reporting the facts or anything else because, well, it's American media, folks, and that's kind of what they do. So they crossed a checkpoint. Even the police captain for Irpin said it was a Ukrainian checkpoint. They started getting shot at this Ukrainian checkpoint, they assume by Russians. But again, why are Russians operating so close to Ukrainian checkpoints without the Ukrainians knowing about it or clearing the area or having eyes on or what have you? Obviously, they could be professionals. There are elements of the Russian military. I know it doesn't look like it right now. There are elements of the Russian military that are very, very good. Very good. Spetsnaz would be one of those units. And they do. They operate in civilian areas behind enemy lines dressed as civilians. That is what they are trained to do. And it makes perfect sense that they would be operating in an area like this. So it's possible, okay? But as the article goes, we're just pointing out that based on the eyewitness testimony, it is crystal clear that this was not a shelling and it wasn't a Russian sniper. They came under small arms fire. They crossed the checkpoint. They came under small arms fire. They turned around. They continued to be shot at. Now, some people say that proves that it was Ukrainian. No. If you shoot a vehicle, if you're a Russian, you shoot a vehicle, comes through a Ukrainian checkpoint, you probably still shoot at them as they go back across. If you're shooting to kill and you're not shooting to warn, then that's how you would engage them. It doesn't make any sense why you would stop shooting just because you turned around. So, again, this gets a little weird. Apparently they were behind a berm, somebody said, so that seems to point towards Ukrainians as well. Maybe. Is it possible Ukrainians are responsible for his death? Yeah, it is. And that's all I'm getting you to try and understand. If it's possible that the Ukrainians accidentally killed him, then, it's possible. Now, friendly reminder, Pat Tillman. Okay, Pat Tillman was an American. He's with the Rangers, former NFL player. Pat Tillman was killed by friendly fire, and the U.S. government lied about it for a long time. It took a while before people figured out that he was in fact killed by friendly fire and not killed by the enemy. This sort of thing happens all the time, okay? It could have been friendly fire. It could have been the Russians, whatever it is. The important things that we need to understand are it's possible that Ukrainians were responsible. The Ukrainian government would not admit to that if it did happen, especially if there was no compelling evidence whatsoever that it was Ukrainians and they couldn't get in trouble. You'd certainly blame it on your enemy. You generate international support that way, maybe draw the United States into the conflict because now an American has been killed, that sort of thing. Then there's the possibility of Ukrainians intentionally targeting Americans in order to try and draw the United States into the conflict. Not accusing them of doing that, but other countries have done that in the past. So it is certainly possible that could be a tactic that the Ukrainians would try and use. start killing Americans. All of a sudden, the war drums start, heating up in the United States. The United States enforces a no-fly zone. American troops land in Ukraine. Russia's pushed out. So it's possible. I'm not saying that that's what's going on. I'm just giving you different scenarios here. And it's always possible that there's just an elite group of Russians that are operating really close to these checkpoints that the Ukrainians operate, and the Ukrainians never have any idea if they're around, and they just shoot vehicles who come across the Ukrainian checkpoint, seemingly with great predictability. And I'm just considering how close this is to Kyiv, for there to be multiple checkpoints where once you get through the Ukrainian checkpoint, you're fired upon, and the Ukrainians don't do anything about that or don't have any idea that there is danger there. That should be very concerning to everybody. So what do we do now when we start running into problems finding information, especially when your trusted alternative to Google, turns into Google? I'll talk about that coming up in just a couple of minutes here on the show. Casey Hendrickson here. Almost said 95.3 MNC. Casey Hendrickson here from the Silver Fox Art Studios. Got to pay some bills. We'll be back in a minute. And welcome back. Real quick, I just wanted to once again just point out that, whatever caused Brent Renaud's death, it's tragic. He certainly didn't deserve it. He wasn't there as an active combatant, and our hearts go out to his family and his loved ones. I know that his brother is a journalist as well, so I want to wish them the absolute best considering the circumstances. This is the story that I was talking about earlier about teenagers in Ukraine going into battle with only 3 days training. And again, where do you put people like that? Now, maybe checkpoints. Put people, at checkpoints. I'm not saying that's what's going on. I just want you to think about this a little differently than as the headlines just come across. Keep in mind that any dissenting opinion has already been rooted out of the media marketplace, and the Western media dictates to you what information you get and how it is presented to you. So, DuckDuckGo. I predicted this a little while ago. I know other people predicted it even before I did. DuckDuckGo has turned into Google. No big surprise there. If you've been paying attention to DuckDuckGo is a very, very, very woke company. They don't like men. They're very, very pro feminism, anti-patriarchy, that sort of thing. They don't hire men. They went on like a hiring freeze for men. They're only hiring women, that sort of thing. And again, of course, you look at the CEOs. Of course, they're all dudes, so you can come to a couple of conclusions. Are they just woke, or are they just a bunch of horny guys that want a bunch of women around? I'll let you decide that. But what's interesting about this is that, that story came out about their sexism over there months ago, and I'm like, find a different company, find a different one. And frankly, DuckDuckGo's results were not fantastic. They started off okay. They were pretty similar to Google's results, and then DuckDuckGo ended up becoming very problematic with their search results. And I moved away from them before, as a regular. I was still using them sporadically, but I moved away from them regularly as a search engine that I would use because the results weren't very good. So I was like, I'd have a better result with Bing. So I didn't really need to use DuckDuckGo. Bing was giving me better results. Not a big fan of Bing either, but most people know that Bing is not a great search engine. So if I explain to them that DuckDuckGo is giving me similar results to Bing, you kind of get where I'm going. So I moved away from them even before the no hiring men policy got exposed by some people who were qualified for the positions and were not hired because of what they had between their legs. And DuckDuckGo has now updated their search engine, will penalize sites associated with disinformation. And, of course, disinformation, oops, hold on a second. I'm going to go to 12-foot. I thought I had already done this, sorry. 12-foot IO. We'll paste this bad boy in here and break this paywall. All right, so they decide what disinformation is. Just like every other social media company, just like Google, their opinion is what dictates disinformation. If they're factually wrong about something, it doesn't matter. You're still the one spreading mis or disinformation because they don't agree with you. So DuckDuckGo has begun penalizing sites linked to Russian disinformation amid the Russia-Ukraine war, according to company CEO. Now, would that include websites that expose that the Snake Island heroes were not actually killed and they're not heroes? Would that include those types of websites? Like so many others, I am sickened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I agree. And the gigantic humanitarian crisis that it continues to create. I agree. Gabriel Weinberg, CEO, wrote on social media at DuckDuckGo, we've been rolling out search updates that downrank sites associated with Russian disinformation, which could be anything. Could be anything. Most of your environmental propaganda, your green propaganda, the planet is dying propaganda, most of that is a Russian intelligence operation. Most of it's not real. I've been highlighting this for years. Most of the very far left-wing pearl-clutching issues are actually Russian FSB operations. And people are falling for it left and right. So I wonder if they'll start downvoting any of that. Of course not. So anyway, DuckDuckGo is also placing boxes with information at the top of the search results page to highlight quality information for rapidly unfolding topics. But you don't even know what information is quality and what isn't. So if you're ticked off that Russia's invading Ukraine, okay, which I can understand, if you're ticked off that Russia's invading Ukraine, and anybody who might be posting the Russian side of things is going to get downvoted, but what if the Russians are telling the truth in that particular story, as they have many times? And the Ukrainians were the liars. You've now effectively censored accurate information for propaganda because you don't like the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And therefore, anything who might support Russia's arguments or stance gets downvoted. Get it? This is what the entire media complex has been doing in the West anyway. So, some users quickly questioned the CEO's update, including Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. DuckDuckGo, contrary to its implicit promises to the contrary, is now in the censorship business. Are there any search engines that respect users? Today, if you're removing Russian disinformation, tomorrow you'll be removing genuine protests. Exactly. And let's not forget that a lot of accurate information was considered Russian disinformation when it came to Trump-Russia collusion, when it came to quid pro quo Ukraine, when it came to election issues, things like that. And it was all correct. But that was the great slander. Oh, it's just Russian misinformation or disinformation, and therefore you can't believe anything. Trump is still evil, and he's a puppet of Putin, which more and more people are waking up to is clearly not the case. Biden has a much more pro-Putin policy position than Trump ever did. So, again, where do you turn? That's a great question. This is probably my first choice right there. Right now, Brave seems to be the best initial option here. Their search results are actually really good, so I recommend that you do it. Brave browser is an alternative to Chrome, and I know that a lot of you have used Brave many, many times before. I know that on my Discord server, for those of you from the Discord server who are watching either on my website or on Rumble, Brave browser and Brave search have been bounced around amongst yourselves many, many times. So Brave search works really, really well. I get decent results with it. I like it. It's pretty clean, streamlined. I enjoy that about it. The results are somewhat pretty. So, for example, let's just do Ukraine since that's what we're talking about. We'll just hit Ukraine. Okay, you get decent results. It's kind of mixed in. It's clean. It's easy to read. all the normal stuff where you can adjust for date, media type, that sort of thing. I think it works very well as a search engine. So if you're looking for an alternative, Brave Search would be one of those. There's various plugins to make it work with Chrome and that sort of thing, but you can get the Brave browser and do things that way. The other one that I've been using sporadically is U.com. U.com does also work pretty darn good. Really good video results with U.com. I get better video results with U.com than I do with Google. So I've used I've used Brave. I tend to bounce back and forth between them. So I'll use one until it doesn't work for a topic, and then I'll go to the other one, and I'll use that until it doesn't work for a topic, and then I'll go back to the other one. Those are the two that I primarily use, and this is a privacy-based search engine as well. I don't know what their company culture is. I would assume that most of the company cultures for these companies are pretty woke. Brave would probably be the lone exception with that. They seem to be very just neutral. We don't really care. We're going to give you search results. So it's kind of what the Brave browser is built upon. It was built to fight censorship of Google and Chrome and all of that. So it makes sense that the Brave search would be a little bit more in line with what many of you might be aligned politically. So but those two are great options. Brave Search and U.com seem to do very well. You can add this to Chrome. There's a roundabout way to add Brave to Chrome, but you can get the Brave browser, like I said, and you don't even have to worry about Chrome. And you can just use the Brave browser that way. So those are my suggestions for those of you who are looking to potentially move away from DuckDuckGo if you have already moved away from Google and you're looking for a better search engine. That would be my recommendations, Brave Search or U.com. Those are the ones that I have found work really, really well. As far as your standard search here, though, this one's the one that I have built into my browser right now, and that is Ecosia. This is my default search in Chrome when I use Chrome. They are a left-wing company, but it is a privacy-based company that goes out there and, they just do your searches and that sort of thing. It's a decent search engine. It's okay. I prefer Brave. So this is just in the ecosystem of a Google Chrome when I'm using my work computers. This works better than using some of the other alternatives. So, although I'll probably switch that to U.com here soon with the new plugin. So those are my recommendations for everybody. Brave Search and U.com are the best. This is what I have as a default, and you can just pick this from a drop-down in your Google Chrome preferred search. All right, folks, I got to run. I got to grab some lunch. I got to prepare for my taxes tomorrow, which I'll be honest with you, I don't know how the show is going to go tomorrow because I'm doing my taxes tomorrow, so I may not have an early show tomorrow. For those of you who are new here, please hit that subscribe button. We do the radio show every single day at 3 p.m. Eastern, so 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., you can watch my radio show on 95.3 MNC. I hope that you will subscribe and share and let everybody know about it. I do appreciate all the support that I've been getting as of late, and lots of headway made on the new website over the weekend. Looking forward to launching that soon as well. It's a little bit behind, mostly because of my schedule, but it's coming along nicely. It's looking great. I just added the store to it, not yesterday, but on Saturday. Started adding a couple of items to it, testing it, making sure the payment processing was working, and that sort of stuff. So remember, the goal is to have the new website be the one place that you go for pretty much all of my content, right? And if you want to watch on Rumble, you can watch on Rumble, but you'll be able to watch on my website like you can now. Social network there, website membership for newsletters and access to certain content and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of options. A lot of options are coming to the new website. Looking forward to unveiling it for all of you and then getting reminded of all the bugs that are still in it that have to be fixed. So looking forward to all of that. All right, folks, I got to run. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Tentative on tomorrow because of doing my taxes. So we'll see. All right. Hopefully we'll be able to get it done tomorrow, but if not, we'll certainly be back on Wednesday. So you all take care. Be safe. We'll see you at 3 o'clock this afternoon.